What's up everybody, it's Charles. Today we're going to be replacing the radiator on the R32. This radiator developed a very small leak right at where the tank portion meets the radiator. I was getting a little hint of coolant smell under the hood, and after a really heavy autocross, I found out that it had a slight leak. Not a huge deal, but also not worth waiting on. So today, I'm gonna show you step by step how to remove the bumper cover, remove the core support, as you can see here, and get a new radiator installed in your car. We also wanna do a really thorough inspection, make sure we don't have any fins that are totally mashed over. There's a couple right here that are a little bit mashed, but they're not too bad. This is something you wanna do before you even start the job. That way, if you need to get another radiator, you can do that and your car is not fully taken apart. The radiator, and more specifically the fins, are very fragile, so while we're working, be really careful not to cause any damage to this brand new, very expensive part. The tools you'll need for this job are pretty basic. We're going to be using an electric impact, a T25, a T30, a 10mm if you can find it, a 13mm, an electric ratchet, trim removal tool, pocket screwdriver as always, some really wicked cool green gloves, a magnetic tray or a mat, something like this grip mat, which is super awesome. And because we ran into an issue, we're going to be using the hose clamp pliers and the coolant hose pick. As always, I'll drop links down in the description to all of this stuff. This is also a really awesome time to go down and hit that subscribe button. We want to make sure that our car is pretty well cooled down before working on our cooling system. We also want to relieve the pressure that's built up inside. So what we'll do is we'll very slowly rotate our coolant bottle cap until we hear the pressure release. Then we can go ahead and take the lid off and set it to the side. That's going to help us cool down faster. Now, if your car is really hot, like all the way up to temp, you do run the risk of coolant bubbling over and coming out of this bottle. So open the cap really slow and be careful. If it starts to bubble out, go ahead and put the cap back on and let it sit. We're going to start by taking the front grill off. First thing we need to do is release the tab for the hood pull. Now mine is actually held in with a cotter pin, so I'm gonna leave it on. If yours is factory, there's gonna be a little clip right here that you'll have to undo and then spread the pull apart. There's just a few tabs holding this grill on. The key is to lift up and pull forward, and then you can usually just work the grill loose the rest of the way. Pull forward on the other front top corner, and then straight up. Now if we had undone our pull, we'd be able to remove the grill, but I'm gonna go ahead and just leave it on here. Next, we're gonna take out 5 T30s that are holding on the bumper. Notice how these bolts have a bit of a shoulder on them? That's so that they don't damage the bumper cover. If you have a bolt that doesn't look like this with this little shoulder on it, probably got the wrong one installed. Next, we're gonna remove the outer lower grill pieces. These should just pop right out. You can see it's held in with just a couple of clips. Now behind each one of the grills is a 10mm nut that we're gonna have to remove. All right, so if you're going to lift the car up, you need to keep a couple of things in mind. One, it needs to be high enough that you can get your catch tray for coolant underneath it. And two, I like to have the wheels actually off the ground. This way we can turn the wheels left and right. It's gonna make accessing the screws on the side of the bumper much, much easier. You can, however, do this without lifting the car if you want. Ramps are okay too, but again, having the ability to be able to turn the wheels left and right makes this job way easier. I like to rotate the steering wheel. You wanna do it to the opposite side. So here we got the left side. You want to turn the wheel all the way to the right. That's going to give us super easy access to the bolts that go through the fender liner and hold on the bumper cover. We're going to remove the series of T25s that go from the fender liner to the bumper cover. And we'll do the exact same thing on the right side. It will make doing this job a bit easier if we go ahead and remove the belly pan, which I have the Diesel Geek belly pan, and these side splash shields. The R32 is the only one that has the side ones, and since this is Mark IV, it's probably missing all this stuff anyway. But let's go ahead and get it out of the way to make it easier. Oh God, that's heavy. Now before we go just ripping the bumper cover off, there's a few more things that need to happen. On the left front, in the bumper cover, is the ambient temp sensor. we can either just pop this out like that, or you can go ahead and disconnect the connector. We also have the side marker lights that we got to worry about. All right, we're going to gently pull the bumper away. It does need to slide forward. There are slots right here that it's hooked into if it's installed properly. Next, I like to reach behind the bumper cover and just pull the side marker light bulb and connector out. Leave the housing in the bumper cover. Do the same thing to the other side. I also like to put my leg right here towards the front so that the whole bumper cover doesn't come flying off. Pull out the connector, and I like to slide the bumper cover back on a little bit and take it off from the front. Before you pull this bumper cover off all the way, you want to find a safe place to put it. We don't want it damaged when we take it off the car. I like to hold it right by where the headlights are. Just nurse it off. Take a really good look and make sure you got everything disconnected, and then just go ahead and pull it away from the car. From here, it's going to be up to you whether you want to remove the entire core support and bumper or simply slide it forward to get access to our radiator. Now, it may come as no surprise that VW has a couple special tools that you're supposed to use when you do this job, but I don't have them, so we're gonna make a workaround. What you don't wanna do is let the core support just hang, held on by hoses and wires. We wanna support it in some way. VW has long bolts with a little ball at the end of it that you're supposed to slide actually right in here that holds that up. Well, I've cut the head off of a couple of bolts so that we can just slide these on. Now, if you're gonna leave the core support and bumper on the car, I think that's a totally cool way to do it. If I were flat rating this, that's how I would have done this. A couple of things I like to do. My favorite is to slide one of these rolly chairs underneath it. It's adjustable height-wise, which is awesome, and it gives us the ability to slide it around, moving the core support much easier. If you don't have one of these, well, one, I think you should get one, but if you don't have one, not a big deal. What we can use is a jack stand. So take your jack stand, set it roughly underneath. I like to use a block of wood, raise it up, and then when we take our core support loose, it'll rest on this block of wood instead of just hanging. Just make sure you're being really careful not to damage the cooler or any of the core support. We're going to take the bolts that are holding the bumper itself, the metal part, to the body of the car and the core support. It's going to be two 13mm bolts, a 10mm bolt, and two T30s. Now for this last 13mm bolt, I'm gonna loosen it, but I'm not gonna take it out all the way. That way when we do the other side, the bumper won't just fall right off. It's a crazy, crazy world because the left side is the same as the right side. Now if you have those special tools, you could thread them in either down here or up here. I'm just gonna leave these in for now. Now our bumper's also held on with two T30s in the middle. So I'm gonna leave these in for now. If you have those studs or the pins, now's a good time to install it. Go ahead and lift up on the bumper a bit and just thread them in, and then you can slide this off. If you do it this way though, you do need to leave the bumper attached to the core support. There's a couple more screws on the front that we're gonna take out before we loosen the entire rest of the core support. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be unbolting the condenser from the radiator and the radiator from the core support. To unbolt the condenser from the radiator, there's two access holes that you're going to need to get to. There's T30s inside these access holes. So these are what the ones look like inside the access hole. This is gonna hold the condenser to the radiator. Pay attention to where these come from so that they go back in the right spot. Just below the bumper is another one. Then we're gonna have two more that are holding the radiator to the core support. These are a little bit wider washers and they're black bolts, not silver. Something else we need to pay super close attention to, notice how coarse the threads are on this bolt. This goes into plastic. The other T30s that we took off are a much finer thread. These are going to go into a threaded insert. If you try and thread this one into the one with the threaded insert, you're going to destroy the threaded insert. So don't get these two switched around. These were through the bumper itself. These are what hold the radiator to the core support. And of course, it's the same on the other side. Condenser to radiator bolt, radiator to core support bolt. Very close to the same deal on the bottom. The bolt to the condenser is in the little hidey hole, and the one that you see exposed holds on the radiator. Now our condenser and radiator are both loose from the core support. All right, we're gonna move under the hood for the final little bit. I like to start with this air ducting here. 4 Phillips head screws. Now you also have the hood cable right here. The cable goes inside of this one and in front of this one. Next, we're gonna take the top bolts out that hold the core support to the body of the vehicle. Now mine are actually 4mm Allens. Yours are gonna be different because I got the fancy ones because, you know, we fancy. I think from the factory, these are gonna be 10mm. As you can see, we fancy. And of course, there's one on the passenger side as well. All right, now we actually have our core support loose from the vehicle. We can take it, we can slide it away. Before you start pulling the core support away too far, you can do a couple of things to help prevent any damage to the fender or to the headlight. You can tape this all off, which works pretty well. I actually like to just take a rag, pull this away, and stuff it in. That way I don't have any risk of messing up the fender. As you can see, this gives us a ton of room now to work with and get the radiator out. If you're gonna remove this, you need to drop the cooler down below the core support. On the passenger side, we're gonna disconnect the hood latch and the headlight. On the driver's side, we only have the headlight plug to worry about. It's a little bit easier to get access to if you remove the battery cover. And then just go ahead and disconnect the headlight. We're going to need to undo the cable for the hood latch. The simplest way to do that is to take a screwdriver, pop the bracket out. All we do is fish the cable out of the pull and set it to the side. Then if everything's disconnected, go ahead and remove the entire assembly. Let's get our catchment vessel in place. Now I'm going to start by taking the lower radiator hose loose. There's a clip on the lower hose. I like to take a flat blade screwdriver or a pick, twist the clip up, lock it into place. If it's being stubborn, hit it with a little silicone spray. We're going to follow the same process for the top hose. Hit it with a little silicone spray, push our clip down, then just rock this hose back and forth till it comes out. There are seals inside of these quick disconnects that you want to take a good look at. If you see any damage to it, go ahead and either replace the quick disconnect or the seal. Now, once we have the vehicle in service position, you have a couple options with the fan and the fan shroud. You can take it out by removing the 4 T30s, 2 at the top and 2 at the bottom, or we can disconnect the electrical connectors and take the shroud out with it. If you are going to take the shroud out, you need to remove those coolant lines way down at the bottom from their retainers. We basically have 3 electrical connectors, 1 for the thermal switch and 2 for the fans. You can see mine's kind of broken up here. Hopefully yours aren't. Let's go ahead and get those disconnected. That just came right unplugged. There is supposed to be a retainer holding these connectors that it looks like my car is probably missing. Go ahead and get that thermal switch. Whenever I disconnect these, I like to look inside of the connector, check for any damaged pins or corrosion. Since we're here, we can fix it if we have to. Let's go ahead and get this other one disconnected. Now, there is one final screw on the driver's side that holds the condenser to the radiator. You can see the line right here. There's a T30 right there. You'll have to remove that in order to remove the radiator. Now we pretty much have the radiator and fan shroud loose. We do need to work around the receiver dryer a little bit. You can see it's actually kind of tucked behind the radiator. So when we remove the radiator, we're gonna pull the condenser away a little bit, lift it up higher on the driver's side first, and then slide it out. Now, when it's free, make sure that you have it the fan side up. Otherwise, any coolant that was left inside of here is going to spill right on the floor, and we don't want that. Here's our old radiator assembly. Let's go ahead and get this fan shroud out. 4 T30 screws. All right, now we can take the fans and the shroud off. Next, we'll go ahead and take our thermal switch off. This is an oddball size. It's like a 29mm that'll fit on it. Luckily, it's not on there that tight. A lot of people will probably use an adjustable wrench on this one. Let's prep our radiator for installation. I like to leave these caps on as long as I can to keep junk out of it. We're gonna start with our thermal switch. Now, pay attention. Some of these actually have a seal, gasket, O-ring, whatever on them. If they do, you probably wanna replace it. A mistake I made in my Mark III and it's leaking. So if you need to, drop a new one of these in. All right, next let's put our fans back on. Great opportunity if you have a questionable fan to go ahead and replace it now. Line that all up. I like to start all 4 screws on this one before tightening any of them all the way. Now you are actually cutting new threads when you install these, and you're just putting it into plastic, so be sure you don't over tighten it. One final piece of this before we go back in the car. I got new mounts. These are what actually secure the radiator to the core support. It is highly recommended that you replace these when you replace a radiator. Think about why we're replacing a radiator. 2 reasons. 1, impact damage and it's leaking. Or 2, no impact damage and it's leaking. Either way, increases in vibration can cause these to leak faster than they normally would. So I always recommend putting new ones on. Yeah, it kind of stinks to buy 4 parts that you may not necessarily have to have, but it may result in not having to do the job so frequently. The whitish yellow ones go on the bottom. This screw hole is going to face the front of the vehicle, or down is the way we have it. The black ones like this go on the top, and they go with this little curved piece facing up. So the 2 parts that kind of look like a V-twin engine face downward. If you don't get this right, you're probably going to line the radiator up wrong and find out that you got to take some of it back apart in order to install these the right way. Oh, one more thing. Let's take our yellow caps off. We don't need these anymore. In fact, I like to take all 3 of these caps and put them on the old radiator so any residual coolant doesn't leak out when I take it to recycle it. Before we get the radiator installed, it's a good time to clean out the condenser. All this debris, blow it on out of there. More importantly, take a look between where the radiator and condenser go. You don't want to have any rocks or anything like that, so that when we tighten down the radiator to the condenser, we end up poking a hole in one or the other. So take an extra minute or 2 and make sure that you don't have any issues here before going back together with it. Before we plug these coolant hoses into the radiator, I like to take a rag and just gently wipe out any dirt or debris from the inside, kind of cleaning that seal in this quick connect. That way, if there's a piece of dirt or something like that, we don't end up pinching the seal. Do that on both the top one and the bottom one. I also like to take a little bit of either silicone lube or dielectric grease or something and just lubricate that. That'll help us install it, put it on the coolant fittings. All right, let's get this radiator back in the car. This might be a little bit of a juggling act working around the condenser, but all of that is much easier than having to evac and recharge the AC system. Here comes our radiator module. Be careful not to put too much pressure on the fins here. We don't want to damage them. Slide it down. Clear the runway over here on this side. Once we have our radiator kind of set in place, we have a great opportunity to have easy access to plug all of our connectors in. And this one here that's broken, we'll probably put a zip tie on it so that it doesn't come unplugged. And we'll go ahead and do our thermal switch last. Put our upper radiator hose on, make sure our clip clips into place. Give it a tug and make sure that doesn't come apart. Let's go ahead and get that lower hose clipped on. Give it a tug. Going back together, we're going to work a little bit differently than we did when we came apart. You remember when we took the core support off, I undid the condenser first, then took the core support off. I'm going to actually bolt the condenser to the radiator now because I think it makes it a little easier going back together with it. We're going to grab our 5 coarse thread silver T30s in order to put the condenser on. We had the 4 on the front and then the 1 down in the bottom driver's side corner. Just like with the fan shroud, I like to start all 4 first so we can make sure it's lined up. Now this is going to be a little easier to manage with the core support since it's already bolted together. Once we're at the point where the radiator is all hooked into the car, it's a good idea to go ahead and start filling the cooling system. This is going to allow us to check for leaks before we get it all put back together and make our wait time to bleed the air a little bit quicker. If you have one of the funnels that hooks onto the radiator or the coolant bottle, use that. I have one somewhere, but who knows where it is. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, I'll drop a link to one down in the description. Let's get our coolant mixed up. If you bought factory coolant, it is concentrate, so we need to dilute it 50-50 with distilled, or really the best thing is deionized water. The store didn't have that, so we're gonna use distilled. I also normally don't like to put it in these jugs, but I don't have another one of these babies. Ooh, purpley. Let's go ahead and pour this into the car. Now this will naturally start to burp out as we keep working, so keep an eye on it and we'll refill it as needed. Anytime you mix the distilled water and the coolant, be sure to label your bottles that they're mixed. That way, if someone else needs some, they know this is ready to go. And this is VW coolant, do not drink, and it's mixed. Try and use this first and get it out of this bottle so that nobody accidentally drinks it. Remember I said to fill it with coolant and do a leak check before we get it all put back together? This is exactly why. We got some coolant leaking out of this fitting, so we're gonna need to get some new parts, get a new seal, or get a new quick connect and get that fixed. Luckily, we found it before we got it all put back together. It'll be way easier to put it on with the car all apart. So talk about following your own advice. We developed a leak here up at this upper radiator hose. Luckily, the dealership came through in a clutch and had the fitting. Now, you can get just the seal, and the seal's like $3 or something like that, where this was about 20. But in order to get the car back on the road, had to spend the extra coin to get it done. Just like that, we're back in action. I don't really see any damage to this seal, but it doesn't matter because it was leaking, so let's keep going. All right, let's go ahead and get the core support put back on. If you didn't take it off, you can slide ahead a couple of minutes while we get this taken care of. Once we have the core support kind of set in place, we need to line up the radiator assembly into the slots of the core support. There's channels in the core support that line up with the mounts for the radiator, and they simply slide in like this. Sometimes this is a bit of a balancing act in order to get it all lined up. Once we get that all lined up, we can slide the radiator assembly all the way forward and go ahead and bolt it in. I actually like to start all of our bolts first. That way, if we got to make any adjustments, we have room to shift the bumper or the core support a little bit. Remember that the T30s that go through the bumper, the metal part, are the fine threads. Go ahead and start those. The ones that hold the radiator to the core support are these very coarse threads. Now, in order to line up the radiator assembly with the core support, you may actually have to come back on the inside and push the radiator forward to line it up. Start our 10mm and do the other side. Now, the other side should be a little bit easier than these were. We already got it mostly lined up. Once all the bolts are started, we can go ahead and tighten them down. Before we bolt this entire unit back up to the car, let's go ahead and get our hood latch put back on. Slip the cable with the ball through the latch piece, and then take the bracket and push it really hard into its locking retainer. Plug in our headlights and our hood switch. There's our hood switch, and our headlight is a little bit lower. All right, next we need to get our core support installed onto the car. This is gonna take lining up the core support to the fender. Typically what you have to do is grab the metal bumper and kind of pull it up. You may actually have to push down on this a little bit to slide it underneath. Do the same thing on the other side. Then we can take the core support assembly, slide it into place. The holes that go through the body of the car to the core support, I like to start those bolts first. Now your bolts are gonna look different because remember we got these fancy guys going in. So I usually just pick up a little bit on the core support to line the hole up and just start the bolt a couple of turns, and that'll hold the core support in place while we do the rest. Go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. Now you notice there's some paint missing and a little bit of oxidation. This is actually a place where water tends to collect. May not be a bad idea to throw some paint on it to make sure you don't get any rust. Lift up on the core support, line up our hole, start our bolt. Next, we're going to put our bolts that hold the bumper to the vehicle. Remember, there were two different ones, one with a stud, one without. The one with the stud goes in the bottom because that's the one that our bumper mounts to. We'll probably need to lift up on the core support a little bit to line it up. Just like we've been doing, I like to start all 4 bolts, the 2 on the left and the 2 on the right, and then tighten them up after they're all started. We'll do the same thing on the passenger side. Now, if we just tighten this up, we're not going to have our bumper lined up correctly. If you look really close, you can see the mark where the bolt was when it was installed before. This is called a witness mark. We really want to try and line the bolt back up with this witness mark. That way when we put our bumper cover on, it'll line up. So normally you'll have to take a little upward pressure, push the core support assembly up, and then slowly tighten it and get it lined up. And do the same thing for the rest of them. Next up, we are going to put the bumper cover back on. Before we do that, run through and make sure all the bolts are tight on the bumper and anything that we're going to cover up. It's going to be much easier to tighten it now than to have to take the bumper cover back off and do it that way. Let's get this bumper cover on. This is a pretty straightforward thing with a couple of things to remember. On the left and right side, there are channels that the sides of the bumper need to slide in at the top. Before sliding the bumper into the slots, we want to make sure that we plug in our side marker light. So just reach behind it and go ahead and plug it into the housing. And we will slide it right into place. And of course, we want to make sure that we get our bolt holes lined up. Now we can go ahead and start putting all the bolts we took out back in. We'll do our 5 in the center section of the bumper. Go ahead and snap our grill back into place. If you disconnected your hood pull, go ahead and hook that back together. I like to give it a couple pulls and make sure that it's going to release. Go ahead and tighten up the bolts that hold the core support to the body of the car under the hood. Put our 10 millimeters that hold the bumper cover on down behind the grills. Pop our ambient temp sensor back in. Snap our grill inserts back into place. Start at the bottom. Get it lined up. Next, let's go ahead and bolt our fender liners to our bumper cover. Now, this is where if you need to make any adjustments on the fitment of the bumper, we can go ahead and do it here. You may have to push the bumper cover in a little bit when you tighten it down to make sure that our line is correct. Let's go ahead and put these hoses back in their retainers, put back on all the underbody shield, and let's go ahead and put on our belly pan. All right, with everything back together and the coolant level topped off, it is time to take it for a test drive. Then we're going to come back and recheck the coolant level. When we're taking the car on a test drive, we're looking for a few things. First, we want to make sure the car actually gets all the way up to proper temperature. We want to make sure that the vehicle has heat. That means hot coolant is flowing through the heater core. We also want to do at least one fan cycle to be sure that our fans are coming on correctly. When we bring the car on back, we're going to take a look at the coolant level, but we're not going to open the bottle. This is hot and it's under pressure, and if we open that bottle, coolant is going to come spewing out. So we can let it cool down a little bit and then recheck the level. I also like to recheck that level one more time, like the next morning, just to be 100% sure it's correct. All right, guys, that's it. Great job. Congratulations replacing your radiator. Links to everything we used today is going to be down below. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share this video. Guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.